I don't know how people get through things like that without Jesus walking in. I look at the video and it stirs me because it takes me right back to the day, and partially because there are still shootings going on, Sandy Hook, Aurora. And when these things happen, we get taken right back to the day. It's like you find yourself, have to remind yourself to even breathe. I think that when things like this happen, you're set up with a couple of choices that you have to make. You're either going to run to God, or you're going to run from Him. And no matter what you do, you're going to get a little bit crazy. I mean, all manners and integrity are going to go right on out the window. And you're going to learn to think before you either do something or say something. One of the first things that happened was that they moved the kids out of the school, and my sister didn't get on the phone and give everybody a call. And I'll tell you something, there were some people that were really angry because they're looking at it on TV. And even somebody said something to one of the women. I said, "You're not even blood. Why are you mad?" And she said, "Because I need to be taken care of." And these are good, decent people. But you know something? We forget ourselves when there's so much hurt. The hardest thing I ever did was to show up at the funeral and grab Cassie's casket. I walk out of that church with it. I didn't know I was going to do that, and I showed up to the church, and my sister flags me down and says, "There's nobody on our side of the family to represent us. Will you be the pallbearer?" And I said, "Yeah." So I went and I found a seat in the aisle, and I put my coat down. And as I'm putting that coat down, I start thinking, I'm really in shock. I don't believe that this has happened. Yeah. This is just a bad dream. And I sat down, and through the funeral, I started getting this pain in my stomach. I mean, my stomach was just getting in knots, and the longer the funeral went on, the worse it got. Because I thought when that casket comes down and I feel the weight, I'm going to be launched into reality. All of a sudden, it's going to be real. The casket came down, and I latched onto it. And sure enough, it became real. My little niece was inside, and I didn't have another niece. She was my only one. But something else happened. I noticed my little sister and her husband coming up behind the casket. And as I'm walking that casket outside the church, I start feeling like I'm taking something away from my little sister that's more precious to her than her own life. And I carried that false guilt for about 2 years. And finally I said, "You know what, Satan, this is not mine to carry." And I gave it back to him. And I was healed of that. Our kids are special. We don't expect something like this to happen. The thing that happened could only happen to somebody else's family, not mine, and yet here it was. And when I first found out about it, I was driving east, headed to another job to do, and I get a call on the cell phone, and my wife tells me that they've been shooting at Columbine. And I thought, well, okay, the kids have something they really need to tell their grandkids when they hit that age. I called my brother-in-law and I asked him if the kids were all right. And he said, well, they found Chris, but we haven't found Cassie yet. And so I turned the truck around and I went to try to get into the area where the school was at. And the house was right behind the school. I'm sorry. Things mixed up there, but I couldn't get into the neighborhood to sit and wait with Brad, so I went over to a friend of mine's house and I watched it on TV. And I probably called again about 3 o'clock, and there's still no word. And I called again about 5 o'clock, still no word. And so I went home, got something to eat, and then my wife and I found a different way into the neighborhood, and we just sat and we waited with the rest of the family. And the scene in there was It was just so surreal. My sister was slipping into shock, and I couldn't do anything to help her. About 10:15, one of the bombs in the school exploded, and it shook the house. And everything got real quiet for a moment, and then my sister panicked and she went running upstairs. But I'm looking at my dad, and he's got this look on his face that in 40 years of knowing the man, I've never seen this look on his face before. I'd seen every look, anger, joy, whatever, but this was something I'd never seen before. And so I finally asked her, I said, "Dad, are you okay?" And he said, "I'm going for a walk." And to tell you about my dad, he was a word cleaver if there ever was any. You can't. If he gets mad at you, it's because you've been pressing his buttons. I mean, you've had that panel out, and you found that one button, and you start grinding away at it. And it's clearly marked danger. And you just keep pressing it, and finally, he gets mad, and there's only one word I got for you: run. And so we went down to where an officer is blocking off traffic to come into the neighborhood. And my dad walks up, and some other guy's talking to the officer, and Dad calmly waits for this guy to leave. And finally he leaves, and Dad walks up and he starts yelling at this cop, telling him how stupid he is because there's a family behind the school that's still missing a child, and they're exploding bombs off in that school. And his hand comes back like this, and I'm standing there going, Dad doesn't threaten. He's going to hit that cop. And I thought, well, all his training, he's going to need every bit of it because Dad's on the warpath. And the cop looked at my dad and he says, "Sir, you can go check on the status of the child at the library." And just that quick, Dad turned around and started walking back to the house. And I'm like, Lord, how are we going to get through this? If Dad can even lose it like that, how are we ever going to get through this? And so we went to the library, and it was closed. But we got through one almost crisis. But Cassie was a very special part of our family. And we don't really realize how special they are until we lose one of them. I don't remember much of Cassie as a baby. I was dealing with a child that had been diagnosed with cerebral palsy, so we were dealing with her, and on top of that, I was a very heavy drinking man at the time. And so my real first memory of Cassie was that first Easter, when we'd all gathered at my parents' house, and I remember the Bernalls pulled up, and Brad gets out and grabs Cassie. He walks through the front door, through the house, out the back door. It was a beautiful day outside. And he sat Cassie down on the lawn, and then he sat across from her. And he just started playing with her hands and with her arms. And it had to have been 2 hours later where my mom says, "Where's Brad?" Nobody knew, and I said, "Well, I saw him go out in the backyard. Didn't he come in?" And I went in the backyard, and there he is, still sitting there playing with her hands and with her arm, and just touching her and enjoying his little girl. And I thought, he's the dad I can never measure up to. I will never be like him. He was such an awesome father. Cassie was a smart little bugger. I mean, I was taking her and my daughter, we were headed west into Golden from Denver. And I had heard that she was using words, but I had never heard her talk before. And so we're heading west, and all of a sudden she kind of sits up in her chair, and she looks out the windshield, and she points. And she says, "Look, Uncle Sherman, there's an M up on that hill." And so my first words of hearing from Cassie was a full, intelligent sentence. And Chris came along, and relationship with the Bernalls was getting together for like camping or the normal things, Christmas, Thanksgiving, birthdays. And I remember Cassie as a toddler, she'd always get this look on her face. You know, she'd stand up and she'd put her lips out, you know, and then she'd like bolt for wherever she was headed for. And I thought, she looks just like a monkey on a mission. And I never told her mom that because I just never figured I could outrun her when she's mad. But she was cute. Holidays, the kids' Christmas, or the kids' birthdays were about a week apart. And so they would always celebrate their birthdays together. They would put the candles on one cake, and then the two kids would get together and they'd blow out the candles together. And I always kind of wondered how Chris felt when Cassie died, because all of a sudden he had a birthday cake all to himself. But Chris got married, and he married a real beautiful woman, and he's got two beautiful little boys. One will be 3 in April. The other one will be 2 in July, so they're very quick about getting their family together. But this is the goodness of God. When Chris married Abby, all of a sudden he had somebody to share a birthday cake with her, because her birthday is about 3 days before his. So this is the goodness of God. I think part of why I'm here is to tell you about Cassie and even about myself, the testimony. But part of it is this language that God has with us. We get burning bushes, and for me, Abby having her birthday 3 days before Chris, that's a burning bush. And I think most of us expect, well, you know, I want to be able to pull up into my neighborhood and watch my house go, you know, and not turn into embers, you know. And then I want to see that front door fly open, and I want to hear the voice coming out the front door, take off those shoes from off their feet. You know, we want that burning bush, but you know something? God wants us to notice the flicker. Because the flickers are forever there. And when we begin to notice the flickers and to begin to thank God, then we begin to get the burning bushes and we recognize them when they're there. God changed up my his language with me about 1.5 years ago. And I was sitting at work one day and I'm praying. I got some stuff going on, and all of a sudden this feather flies over my shoulder. And I'm like, I don't know birds in here. And all of a sudden I'm getting feathers all the time. You know, I'll be talking on the phone with somebody and I'll get feathers. You know, they'll be on the living room floor or whatever. You know? And one day I found a feather at the shop, and I put it up on this shelf thinking I'll go back and bag it later. Because I got so many of them anyway, I'm not worried about it. The next day, I open up the door and the wind is blowing like crazy, and all of a sudden I see this feather going, you know. And I said, God, I want a feather to replace that feather that I just lost. I know it's asking a lot, and I was really careless with it, but that night, about 5 o'clock, I'm gassing up a work truck, and I got done, I'm pulling away from the island, and the wind is blowing hard, real hard, and I look over, and here comes this feather, and it sticks to the driver's side of it. And I'm like, oh boy, I gotta pull over to the other side of the gas station because, you know, this feather is gonna blow away. And I gotta get out of the way of traffic. But you know what, I got over to the other side of the gas station, I rolled down the window, and I was able to pick that feather off. That's a burning bush. Wow. When I first found out I was coming, I asked God what He wanted me to talk about. And after 2 days, He says, open your mouth and I'll fill it. And I said, oh, thank you. You know, and God, we have this relationship 2 weeks later. I'm telling this girl about, I'm going to come up to Salida and do a speaking engagement, which I never do. I haven't done this for 3.5 years, and she says, testimony. Your testimony and Cassie's testimony. And I said, okay, good. And then I'm driving home, and I said, Lord, there's so much testimony. What testimony would you like me to give? And he says, I'll let you know. I started writing out these footnotes, right? And I'm like, it just doesn't make sense. Everything's all over the map. But at least he let me kind of draw out some of these footnotes. But Cassie, my parents bought a house in Grand Lake. And we all went up there one year to spend some time with my parents and do some water skiing. I have a boat, and so I'd always take the kids out on the boat and we'd go water skiing. And Cassie and her parents were having a real bad time. Cassie was angry. And sometime during the weekend, Cassie walks up to my wife and she says, can I come stay with you? And my wife says, yes. And I'm like, are you crazy? What did you just do to me? You know, I don't need this battle with my family, you know. But, you know, nothing ever, I'm like praying, oh God, get me through this one. You know, nothing ever happened to that. And one night, and I guess probably in the afternoon, I get a phone call from my sister, and she says, what do you know about demon possession? And I said, well, I don't chase demons and hunt witches or anything, but I know that when somebody's possessed, those little buggers don't want to leave. And she begins to tell me about this notebook she found. She says she was up in Cassie's room looking for a Bible that my wife and I had given her. And she says, I found this notebook, and it's full of notes back and forth between Cassie's best friend. And then there's some drawings. And she says that the kids are talking about killing us. And when I heard drawings, I'm like, okay, I've seen this before. And there's no mistaking it. When something's demonic, you know. And so I went over there that night, and Brad was there. We got talking about this notebook and the drawings on it. And Brad didn't want Misty to show me the notebook, but for some reason she went upstairs and she grabbed it, opened it up, and just about that quick I closed it, and I said, you got problems. One of the drawings on there was Brad and Misty hanging, and the other drawing was of the two of them being stabbed in a knife with no hand on it, but blood dripping off the knife. And it's like, you know, this is demonic. This is some stuff. This is not just an angry child. This is somebody who's possessed. And so she took it to the sheriff's office, filed a restraining order, had a meeting with the girl's parents, and just told her, we're going to separate the kids. We don't want these kids being friends anymore. As they were leaving from the meeting, the girl walked up to my nephew, who was standing at the door, and she says, you tell Cassie that if she wants help killing her parents, I'll do it.
Wow.
So it was serious, and they were trying to find somebody that would actually do the deed. Misty pulled the kids out of school and put Cassie on restriction. The only thing she was allowed to do was go to school and go to a youth group. And when they went in for the interview with the principal, the principal told them that Cassie was so far gone that there was no hope for her. And this was a man that had dealt with bad kids before, but there was something really bad about Cassie. And the other thing is that he found out, well, this guy used to be one of the gym teachers at my old junior high. I never had him, but he still remembered me. When he found out that Chris and Cassie were my niece and nephew, he said, oh, no. I was a bad one. Little troublemaker. The other thing she did was she took Cassie into youth group and she interviewed with the youth pastor. And he also said there's no hope for Cassie. And I think maybe part of it was because she didn't want help. Was why they weren't giving her any hope. She really liked what she was doing. For the next 6 months, life was pretty miserable around the Bernall household. Cassie was threatening suicide. She was angry, fighting her parents, sneaking out to see her friend, and doing all kinds of things. But one day, she came home and she says, "Mom," she says, "the youth group is going up on a retreat up in Estes Park. I want to go with them." And with a lot of reluctancy, they gave her permission to go, and I guess they took her to the church, and Cassie gets into this car with this other girl that had befriended her. And they went up to Estes Park. And somewhere along the way they stopped, and the girl got out. And I guess the rest of the kids in the car got out, followed her, and she says, "Isn't that amazing? Just to look at the beauty of the mountains." And Cassie said, "Yeah." And so I didn't hear what happened on that retreat. But what I did hear was that Misty and Brad wanted to meet the kids at the parking lot of the church. The bus came in, they're still waiting, and this little red car comes pulling up, and it's full of kids, and when they open the doors, all this smoke comes billowing out, and Misty's thinking, "Oh boy." And Cassie gets out, and she walks up to Misty, and she says, "I've changed. I will prove it to you." And she did change. She found Jesus that weekend. She was set free. This girl got grace. I mean, most of us really fight to get our head around this thing called grace. You know, we just think we're so unworthy. Cassie walked in grace. She knew she was a child of God. She knew she was forgiven. And she knew that she was just moving forward in her life with Jesus, and she was so at peace. And there was one year where I think she was 15. There wasn't just 1 year, it was probably the first year that she was saved, that I went into this cove with the kids. And I'd taken everybody else skiing, and I thought, well, it's my turn. And so I told Cassie, well, I'm going to jump in and go skiing, you're going to pull me. And she says, I can't do that. I don't have my driver's license even. I said, do you have a learner's permit? She says, yeah. I says, you're good to go. So I got out and I went water skiing. She pulled me. And after she died, I'm thinking, you know, I can count the number of people I trust to pull me with one hand. And I trusted her. There was so much peace about this girl that I trusted her to pull me. April 20th, everybody knows that shooting happened. But God began to show up right away. When Cassie was alive, they called her Bunny Rabbit. And in my yard, I've been living in my house for 4 years, and I'd never had a bunny rabbit in my yard. I'd had all kinds of other wildlife, but I'd never had a bunny rabbit. Sleep was really weird for those first couple of weeks. It's like you sleep for an hour, maybe two, and then you're up for 2-3 hours, and then maybe you're down for the rest of the night if you're lucky. I got up at 2 o'clock in the morning, and I stepped out on my front porch, and there in the grass on either side of my front lawn were 2 bunny rabbits. Wow. I had a bunny rabbit in my driveway every night for the next 6 months. And so God was just there. I mean, this was a burning bush. God was just there. I was so ready. I remember this huge weight falling off of me. And thinking that God wasn't going to show up. It was one of those deals where it was going to be 7 years before God showed up and started really making something good happen out of it. But He showed up right away. And began this language. It seemed like every time I would see a bunny rabbit in my yard, something was going to happen. Something was going to change. And I remember even one time, I was looking out in my front yard, and there, under my mailbox, were probably 2 bunny rabbits, little bunny rabbits playing around the mailbox. And all of a sudden there was 3. And all of a sudden there was 5. And all of a sudden there was about 8 of them. And it was like I didn't even see where they were coming. It was like they were just appearing. You know, God was just putting them there. And I'm like, you know, what is He saying to me? Is He just saying hello or what? You know, but here in the last few months, I finally realized that I was going to do this fathering thing. And these bunny rabbits were the kids that were going to come into my life that I was going to get to minister to. After Cassie was killed, my mom and I used to talk. Probably every 2 weeks we'd talk for a good 2 hours, just going over all the things that were happening in Columbine. I'm explaining my sister to her and the things that are going on with her and why Missy can't be paying attention to her. It was a horrible time for her. But every time that conversation would end, she would say, you know, your father is so angry. He's angry with God. And this man loved God. I mean, this man had Bibles, the Gideons, he would be stacked up in his garage, and he was very involved with that ever since I could remember. And she would say, he's so mad at God, but I keep telling him that we can not go to church, we can just watch it on TV. And she says, and every Sunday morning, he gets up and we go to church. And at the end of 2 years, God opened up this ministry for them to go into some of the public schools. And they would hit 3 schools in a morning. And they would do these little skits. The ministry they were working with was Rick and Mick, and these were 2 guys about that tall, and they were just hilarious. And they would do these skits, and then they would talk to kids about drugs and alcohol and abstinence as opposed to protection. And then Mom and Dad would be able to get up and they'd talk about Cassie. And Mom says one time, she says, you know, we go in, we talk about Jesus and everything, we don't get thrown in jail. I was listening to Rick and Mick. I finally got to meet them about, it was probably sometime around 2 years after Mom and Dad had gotten started with them. And Rick was giving us the statistics. I just learned to talk, and he says, you know, he said, we went from 17,000 commitments a year to over 50,000 commitments for Christ when Lee and JJ came on. Wow. On top of that, every time they go into a school, the kids would line up out the door and they would patiently wait to hug Mom and Dad. So God was just lavishing all that love, you know, on Mom and Dad. And for the next couple of years, that's the way it was for them. So when bad things happen, we hang on. We cling to God for all we're worth. There was another, I want to give you this before I quit here. The book came out about 6 months that my sister had written. It came out about 6 months after the shooting. And they set up a web page in my niece's name. And on this web page was a block where you could go in and you could write the message board. That's what I'm looking for. And there was this girl on there that was fighting with the atheists, because we did all kinds on that. And she would be fighting with the atheists. And my handle was Speedster 251, and she was Speedy Betty. And so I got to talking with her, and we switched names and stuff, so that we started doing the I am thing all the time, and I'd come home and we'd spend hours on the I am. Finally, I got her phone number, and we began to talk, and she was about 16 years old at the time. And we're talking, and we started talking about birthdays, and I told her, well, I was born September 13th. She had an uncle who actually died, whose birthday was September 13th, a different year from mine. By the way, she and I had started calling each other niece and uncle. And I was actually feeling kind of bad about it. But this was a confirmation that this was from God. As we talked a little bit further, she says her mom's birthday is June 13th. My sister, Cassie's mom's birthday is June 13th. We look for the things that God does in our life, and we give Him credit for it. We give Him the glory. And if you're hurting this morning, you need me to pray for you, I'm right here. You need to bend my ear right here. If you don't know Jesus, come talk to me. I'll introduce you.
Amen. Thank you, Quentin.